Hello, Year 9, and welcome back. We are going to be starting a new inquiry this half term and a new topic. We're going to be just introducing the topic today and then starting our inquiry in the next few lessons. And I've just put a few pictures on the screen to get us started and thinking about what our topic might be, what might link these people together. So have a little look, have a study, see how many different ideas you can come up with. Pause the video before moving on. I'm going to move on though now, and I'm going to come back to what your ideas are just after. But we're going to come up with some statements now that are going to link to that first slide. I want you thinking, are these statements facts or are they fiction? Are they not true? First one. Black people first came to Britain via Empire Windrush 1948. So Empire Windrush was a ship that docked in Britain. Is that fact or fiction that they first came via this ship? 2. There were no black slaves in Britain. Fact or fiction? 3. All black people in Britain were enslaved until the abolition of slavery. So enslaved, they were slaves, and abolition means the end of slavery. 4. Black Britons were not wealthy in Britain in the past. 5. Black British history and Black American history are very similar. Again, pause the video if you need a bit more time and think through each of those. I'm going to go through them. So first one is actually fiction. It is not true. There were black people in Britain before 1948 and before Empire Windrush. The second one is also fiction. There were black slaves in Britain. So the statement is wrong. There were black slaves in Britain. Third statement was also a fiction. It is not true. There were both slaves and non-slaves in Britain before slavery was abolished. Statement 4 is also fiction. There were some wealthy Black Britons in the past too. And number 5 was also fiction. You can see a pattern emerging. As much as there are some similarities between Black British history and Black American history, there are also a lot of differences. And there's a lot of different contexts that were going on at the same sort of time. What I'm trying to kind of give you here is kind of thinking about maybe some misconceptions people have, some ideas about the past that aren't necessarily true, and we kind of want to think about those today and possibly challenge some of those today. So we go back to our slide. Hopefully you've come up with some brilliant ideas and lots of different ones. There could be loads of links. The big one that hopefully you've gathered from those facts or fictions is that these were all significant Black Britons. So these are British, Black, and had a massive impact on Britain itself. And that is our link. And I'm just going to talk through roughly who some of these are. At the top left, you have a person called Aluda Equiano. This person here is known as the Ivory Bangle Lady. You have Walter Tull. You have a person known as Lord Kitchener, who was a calypso artist, a musician. You have John Blanc. You have the people who kind of led the Bristol bus boycott, a person called Paul Stevenson. And you have someone called Sarah Forbes Bonetta here. Hopefully you will find out some more information about these and do some research on these yourself over the next couple of lessons. And the title for today is up to you. I want you to create your own title. Think about what it might be called. I'm going to give you a statement here that I think is a really fascinating, interesting statement. By a person called Peter Fry wrote this book. Black people were in Britain before the English were. I think that's a really interesting statement because he's taking this idea about, well, who were the English, when were the English, and the geography of the land. So England as a place, as a country, was created after there was land where England sits. So the idea of England and English didn't really come until the Anglo-Saxons and beyond. And Peter Fryer is saying, well, black people were already in this country before the idea of England even existed. And that is something it's really important to recognise and remember. And another really important, interesting man is David Olusoga, and he's written a brilliant book. There's a video link here that I want you to watch. It's in the assignment that your teacher will set you. So after you've watched this video, have a watch of that video to find out a bit more. And what he's trying to do again is to challenge some misconceptions and trying to introduce some key ideas that black people were living in Britain for centuries. They're present all the way back into the Roman times within Britain, and they had a fundamental part of British history. And we're going to just introduce a few ideas, a few elements of that today for you to kind of think about. And then we're going to kind of talk and look at and learn about a really specific part of Black British history. The first person we're going to look at and think about is this person here. She was known as the Ivory Bangle Lady. She lived in the 4th century in Britain, so the 300s. I'm not going to read out all this information, but I want you to pause the video and read it yourself as well. She was found by archaeologists in 1901, but obviously lived in the 4th century. And they knew she was black because her skull suggests she had North African ancestry, so they did tests on her. What's interesting, she was also most likely a middle-class Afro-Roman, because her, possessions comprised of a bracelet made of African ivory. Interesting. And that is from the 4th century. Second person, again we saw him in the intro, John Blanc. He was from the 1500s. He was a trumpeter, so a musician in the court of Henry VIII. And by the court, it means like the surroundings of Henry VIII. They kind of followed Henry VIII around, a group of people who kind of looked after him, but also were part of celebrations, feasts, etc. Another spelling mistake you'll spot. He came to England in 1501 as one of Catherine of Aragon's attendants. So Catherine of Aragon was one of Henry VIII's wives, and John Blanc would have been being part of looking after Catherine of Aragon. What's interesting though is the first Black Briton we have in picture as such. So this is a real picture from that time. And also what's interesting is he actually demanded created a petition to demand a pay rise for himself. And he actually doubled his pay. But that's because he was such a skilled musician and he valued that skill himself. Again, pause to read through more bits of information. Aluda Equiano from the 1700s. Now, Equiano was once a slave, but he managed to buy his own freedom, gained his freedom. And after that, he became part of a group known as the Sons of Africa. And they campaigned for the abolition of slavery in Britain. And he was integral, fundamental to the abolition, and that's the end of slavery in Britain. He also produced his own autobiography. Now that abolition ended, or started as such, in 1833. So that was the Act of Abolition that ended slavery. Before that, there had been an earlier Act of Abolition, and that was the slave trade. So they ended the slave trade, Britain's involvement in it, in 1807. But not until 1833 did they actually ban or abolish slavery itself. Hopefully you'll recognise the transatlantic slave trade here, and Britain was heavily involved in this, as you can see. But what people don't always know is that under this Act of Abolition, very bottom here, slave owners were actually compensated for being told they were no longer allowed slaves, and they were given £20 million in total. Huge sum of money. And former slaves were not freed immediately. They sometimes had to work for 4 to 6 years in what was known as apprenticeships. Another element I'm introducing you to today is the soldiers who fought for Britain in World War I and World War II. More than 1 million black people participated in World War I globally, fighting on behalf of the British. Walter Tull, who was once a footballer, fought in World War I and is one of the most celebrated black British soldiers during this time. But there was also soldiers abroad, and that is from the colonies, because Britain had an empire at this time. And so you have in the bottom left here this picture of the British West Indies Regiment, who fought for Britain in World War I. But also, colonial soldiers fought in World War II. So actually, almost 7,000 men from the Caribbean joined the RAF in World War II. Now, these are just some elements of black British history. It is not all. It is just some to introduce you and to get you thinking about what constitutes black British history, what's happened, what was the story, and how integral and fundamental a part of British history they are. So your task today, I want you to obviously watch that other video first, and that is on your assignment. And then we need to write down 5 things you can learn from each personal event from this video. You can obviously do more research yourself. And then we need to think, what can these people events tell us about the story of black people in Britain? What about maybe how long black people have been in Britain? What role they've played? Conditions they lived in or worked in? Life was like, etc. And then as an overall, so do that for each one. And then as number 3, an overall, what can we learn so far about black British history? Again, thinking about those questions. Then there's a little quiz on the assignment, and there's an extension to watch a documentary or start watching it on black, known as Black and British, A Forgotten History. And don't forget to give yourself a title. Think about what you would call it, what you would give a name to it as, this lesson.